Women in Climate is a podcast sponsored by GIB Asset Management and brought to you by The National. GIB Asset Management is a boutique asset manager with sustainable investments at the core of their active investment business. Their belief is working together as one, bound by a common purpose to be a force for performance, a force for better. Find out more at gibam.com. Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Women in Climate podcast series, sponsored by GIB Asset Management and brought to you by The National. I'm your host, Naomi Kerbel, and in this episode, we're spotlighting two more trailblazing women who are shaping the future of our planet. Last week, we explored the often overlooked gender gap within the climate crisis, venturing into schemes that have been rolled out to reduce the disproportionate impacts of climate change on women and children. And we discuss how to further uplift and amplify women's voices in climate decision-making. If you haven't heard that episode, do go back and have a listen. And today we're looking inwards and exploring what it truly takes to be a leader in this space. In this episode on Proven Action, we'll discuss how to break through barriers and push the needle on real change, especially as women in an industry still largely dominated by men. While progress has been made, as of 2023, women only represented 30% of C-suite leaders. And researchers found that gender-diverse firms tend to have better environmental reporting and climate governance than their peers, and do so while staying financially competitive. As such, the need for women in climate, especially in leadership roles, is greater than ever. We'll hear firsthand from our guests about the lessons they've learned throughout their careers, both from their triumphs and their failures, and how these experiences have shaped their leadership style and their ability to drive meaningful change in their respective fields and beyond. Climate isn't just a topic of conversation, it's a call to action, and these women are leading the charge, proving that real change is possible when we take bold steps to tackle it head-on, whatever our sector, whatever our level. So, joining me today is Magali Anderson, board member, former CSO of Holcim, and founder of S4, a newly formed group of sustainability activators who are empowered to change the system from the inside. And Amanda Carpenter, chief executive and founder of Achill Legal, an organization that brings together leaders from academia, business, and professional services to collaborate and find solutions to the complex problems that climate change presents, supercharging sustainability across the legal profession. Magali and Amanda, a warm welcome.
Thank you.
So, Amanda, if I can come to you first. You're founder and director of Achill Legal, and I've said in that introduction, the mission is to build sustainability across the legal sector. But the law industry per se doesn't have a huge direct carbon footprint. So why do you think this mission is so important within the law?
Well, that's a really great question. You're right. The legal sector doesn't have a huge carbon footprint in that it's primarily just offices and buildings and travel, obviously, huge amounts of travel. But it's a small fraction of the overall carbon that's emitted across the economy, I guess. But what the legal sector does have is influence. So if you think about any transaction anywhere in the world, be it local, national, global, whether you're buying a house or, doing a mergers and acquisition or financing a new wind farm, you have a lawyer sitting in the middle of that transaction. So, and I'm talking here about private sector law firms, so the private practice rather than the actual business of law through the courts and barristers and chambers. We can come on to that because that's a different form of influencing. But those private practice lawyers, they're sitting at the centre of those transactions. And of course, they're always constantly in touch with their clients. So they're really important influencers for change. And I think the legal sector has been slow to realise how valuable its influencer role is. But as the world changes and transitions and we look at a changing nature of our economies and hopefully we continue on our green transition, it's more and more important that those law firms are working with the right kind of clients and encouraging those clients who are on a transition journey themselves to actually make the changes. So they're influencers, they're guiders, they're trusted advisors, and that's a very, very powerful place to sit. And I think that's the capacity that they have to be that lever of change. So not just leading by example, by looking at their own emissions, and many of them are doing that, but also trying to encourage their clients to be on a meaningful net zero journey.
That point, Magali, around influence for change, I know that the work that you're doing with S4, which I'd like you to come onto in a moment, really delves deeply into that at every level within an organisation. But that piece that Amanda just mentioned there about being levers for change, When you were at Holcim, you had the ability to do that. It's one of the world's largest cement producers. And much of your early career was spent within large oil field services companies. So I'm really keen to understand how you made that change in direction for your career and how you then became a lever for change within that or within that sphere.
Well, I think my CV shows that I'm the perfect candidate to make that change. Actually, and I'm being serious when I say that, because there's a lot of people trying to do things and a lot of excellent people trying to do things. What's not always very obvious is people understanding enough how companies work from the inside to change them from the inside. Companies might change because people will ask them to change sometimes, especially when it's an investors. But when you are yourself at the governance of that company, your levers are way, way bigger. And this is really what happened in Holcim is when they created the Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer role, they put it at the executive committee. And what it actually meant is that I was part of every single strategy discussion, investment discussion, you name it. And I understood enough of how the business was operating to know how to place my seeds and how to change things, which is not coming up with super expert arguments to a business world. Quite often there is a gap of understanding there, lost in translation, as we say. Having a business person talking about climate change or anything else related to sustainability means that I'm using the vocabulary that people understand and they can act on it.
And talking to that point, Amanda, about vocabulary within the legal profession, what a wordy profession. And at that point that Magali so expertly made about understanding the companies from the inside and that governance piece, I'm sure that that is something that you're really trying to do, particularly through the Legal Charter 1.5. I'm keen to understand a little bit more about that and how you're delivering that really measurable climate action through that.
You're absolutely right, Magali, about the vocabulary and needing to be at the centre of things and framing this as a governance conversation and as a business conversation. The thing about Legal Charter 1.5 is that you probably know, Naomi, I'm sure your listeners know, that there's a plethora of organisations working in sustainability across the legal space. There has been for many, many years. We're lucky enough to run 5 of those networks, one of which has been around for nearly 20 years. But there's a lot of them, and they're all doing slightly different things, and they're supporting different parts of the sector to do different things. But about 3 or 4 years ago, in conversation with a number of leading figures in the legal industry, not least Shane Gleghorn, who's the managing partner of Taylor Wessing, we were talking about how lawyers can influence change. Just your question, what role do lawyers have in terms of promoting sustainability and making a real difference? And it occurred to us that there's a bit of a lack of ambition around this. What's happening is that we're looking very much at the transactional processing stuff. So firms looking at their own carbon footprints, some firms looking at client relations, but no one was grabbing that really ambitious agenda. And that's what the Legal Charter 1.5 has done. I mean, it's ambitious enough to keep 1.5 in its name, even though the science is telling us that we're really struggling to meet that target. It's still our committed Paris-aligned target, so we're still committed to that. And it's about raising the ambition of firms to tackle those difficult conversations and to work much more productively with their clients and the kind of businesses that Magali has been working in, to be there to make that change happen. And I think the charter it's not for everyone. Not every firm is going to join it, because not every firm is going to be able to sign up to some of its principles and aims. But those firms that are really at the cutting edge of sustainability and are with their clients at the cutting edge of sustainability are members of the Charter. So it's an ambitious network to say, what more can we do? And alongside the law firms engaged are the GCs and the clients sitting around the table. And what's interesting to us, and plays back to your point, Magali, is that actually we're finding that clients and GCs are asking their law firms to be more ambitious on this agenda. They're actually saying, yeah, cool. We know you can do the work. We know that you're brilliant at the legal part of what we ask you to do. Your transactional stuff is superb. Where is your ambition? How are you helping us to be ambitious? What ambition are you showing? And that partnership of ambition is really powerful, I think, in terms of making the change. And, clients can't do it on their own, and law firms can't do it on their own. Businesses need lawyers just as they need accountants and other professional services. So it's that creating the ambition in the firms to step up and, I suppose, respond to that challenge, really. And that's what the Charter does. And it scopes out activities that firms can do together and independently and alongside their clients.
And as you say, bringing together the GCs, the General Counsel, and the other management of organisations, to Magali's point there, sitting that one level higher to raise that bar of ambition. Magali, in your role at Holcim, you were bringing some really innovative, I would say sometimes challenging ambitions to that executive committee. Firstly, can you talk us through a little bit about those strategies? Because it's always useful and our listeners always like to hear best practice and some tactical advice on what they can potentially be doing, but also how it went down. Was it received with open arms?
Yeah, thank you. And how much time do I have?
All the time in the world.
I just wanted to take a second to bounce back on what Amanda said. I think it's really, really good to hear that companies are asking you to be more ambitious. I think it's really good news to hear that. So I just wanted to make that point here. The cement industry was actually quite in advance. I know it's not very well known, but they started monitoring their emissions in the 90s. The first time we had a target in Holcim was 2002. So it's not like there was a lot of things that had been done. What was clearly missing is putting it at the center of the governance and the strategy of the company. I guess they were waiting for someone like me to come and bridge that gap. But there was a huge work already done by the team, just they were not managing to raise it at the right level. But what we did millions of things. We were the first in the sector to do our net zero pledge, and we did it with our pathway validated by Science-Based Target Initiative. So we did it in a very credible way. And that opened the door to the others to have to follow our track, because we are in a very conservative sector where companies don't like to be first movers. We did lots as well on circular economy. I used to say that Holcim was a waste processing company that was doing cement as a byproduct, because that's how much waste we were using, which was quite fantastic. Huge on nature. We were the 7th company in the world to have a science-based target on biodiversity, and that was part of the work that was done after that SBTN, which is NI is for Science-Based Target Initiative, N actually for network, but you could say it's for nature. We were one of the first 3 companies to be validated by SBTN. That was after my time, but that's things that we were doing which were quite fantastic. And also the social. 1.6 billion people don't have a proper roof on their head. So I think, you mentioned climate change earlier. I think we need to really think of the overall picture. You can't talk about climate change without talking about the social side of it, and you can't do it without talking about nature side of it. So we did a lot of things, but again, that was because most of the foundation had already been done. So the only thing I needed was to build a house on the top of that, and I could do it because I was at the executive committee. And again, because I was speaking the language. To answer the second part of the question, which was how difficult was it? Well, I had to convince my boss and the board and everyone else that being a first mover was all right. And I think that was actually the hardest. So I use a method of, in French we call it the COI method. I don't think that's the right word in English. But it means that I was dropping the word pledge as often as I could with my boss and the other people, so that the day I came up with the actual pledge, they actually were slightly familiar, so it was not a complete surprise. And the other thing I did, and that's why it took us 1 year to come out with it, is we did a huge amount of work working with bottom up. And something you will notice, if you ever ask for an opinion on a new topic to a manager, whoever that manager is, the first thing he or she will do will be to send an email to all the first line asking for an opinion, which in turn will do the same. So if you work bottom up, when they ask opinions of people below, they are already convinced it's the right thing. So by the time you go to the top, but that takes a lot of time, but it's a very well spent time because you don't have that many shots at it. So when you go to the board or to the executive committee with that very new idea, not new idea, but quite revolutionary in the sector, to say, hey, let's go, let's sign for the net zero pledge, you have to be sure that's going to be approved. So you must have work doing all the internal lobbying you could do, etc., because you will only have one shot at it.
Amanda, I see you nodding there, and I wonder whether that chimes with the legal profession, also a very conservative sector, where I imagine people don't really want to be first movers. But that thing around the bottom-up approach, is that something that you found has worked? I'm really keen to understand a little bit about where you're seeing impact being made and being adopted.
You're right. The legal sector is traditionally quite conservative and quite slow to move. Another thing that characterises it is it tends to be quite competitive. Far be it for me to say that lawyers are competitive people, but they are. So getting groups to work together is quite an unusual aspect of the work that we've been able to do, and that's what we do. We do coalition building to try and get groups of organisations to work together and to get law firms to work together. But in answer to your question, I think that you're absolutely right, Magali. It's a bottom-up, top-down process. What's happening, of course, in the practice of law firms, so in big international law firms, is that there's a bit of a talent war going on. And I think pressure from young people is really, really helpful. We do definitely see movement in response to that pressure. And groups like Law Students for Climate Accountability and Legal Voices for the Future here in the UK, they're really pushing the law firms that they want to work for to respond to the questions that they raise. So I think there's a retention talent war issue that's influencing this. I think there's also, law firms are quite tiered. So a lot of the people who are still sitting in those senior leadership positions have been there for a long time. They may well be in their kind of mid to late 50s. But the next tier down, where we have far more women represented, that's sort of, first partners or senior associates, they're much more conscious of these issues, because not just because they're women, and though I would argue that there is a different gender imbalance about how we feel about the climate. So it's kind of ironic that we hear lots of male voices on climate, but it's always disproportionately women who are impacted by climate change and who have actually, are much more connected to this as an issue. So a lot of those women, those emerging partners, those beginning to be senior professionals in the legal sector are women who care about this. I mean, not exclusively, there are a lot of men who care as well, but I do think that's changing some of the narrative. So I think that really helps from the kind of bottom-up perspective. And then you need a few really standout leaders at the top who are responding, as Magla said, when you go with a request, who will take it and who will run with it. And I think that's what characterises some of the leadership teams in the legal charter groups and in some of the other groups we work with, is where you've got somebody who's committed. So they bought into the narrative both from a business risk point of view, because if your clients are saying this is an issue, then it's immediately an issue for you as a business, and it's a risk issue. But they've also bought into it emotionally, because it's a head and a heart thing. And you can get all of the economic arguments in a line, but if you can't win somebody over to have a little bit of passion, you're much less effective. So you need both. You need to have a very strong business case. You need to have all of the work done that Magali's just outlined. You need to build the lobbying internally. But you also need a leader who sees it and gets it. And I always say I'm not really too bothered about their motivation as long as they get it. Some people get it because they want the glory. Some people get it because they think there's a financial benefit. And some people get it because they really care. And they look at, the existential crisis of the climate and they say, I owe this to my children, my grandchildren, my neighbours, my friends, my family, humanity. And actually, I'm less bothered by motivation. I'm only really bothered by action, actually, because that's what we need. We need action. We're running out of time so fast that we need people to take action. So getting that bottom-up, top-down bit is really key, and finding your champions where you can. And sometimes those champion roles, I'm sure you found this, Magali, can be really lonely. You might be the only voice in your firm saying this, and that's a really lonely place to be. So having a network to support those people is absolutely crucial.
Magali, does that chime with your experience? And also to Amanda's point about more women, I'm keen to understand, given you've spent such a long time in largely male-dominated industries, whether you think women are uniquely positioned to champion this, or whether that's a fallacy.
I'm not sure if it's only about women. I think it's about different leaders. I think the leaders that unfortunately seems to be coming back in fashion since the last couple of weeks, of those very masculine energy, super strong, etc., it will be very difficult to make them move. But the new type of leaders, which, by the way, young people are asking for, I like what you said, Amanda, about talent attraction. We really saw it in Holcim. After coming up with the pledge, we went from young people not wanting to work for us, I'm just saying at large, to starting having, I won't say an overwhelming number, but more or less of people saying, hey, we want to come and work for you, was really quite amazing. And when you listen to the young people, they tell you they want vulnerable leaders. And what it actually means is they want leaders who are open to discussion, who are saying, I don't have all the answers. I need you to help me to get those answers. And I think that makes a big difference in how you deal with a topic such as climate change, biodiversity losses, etc. I think it makes a big difference. But I mean, I was, like you say, a woman in a very male-dominated industry. I certainly managed to go there because I was very resilient and strong against the bias. So I think our fight, and the fight of the people like me, I consider myself as a pioneer, is really how do we remove enough of those bias that people only move and have access to the right level of responsibilities while bringing a different type of leadership to the table. And that thing for me, if we manage to do that, then we'll be cooking with gas. And now we don't want to cook with gas, do we?
But you're so right. It's about your phrase, vulnerable leader, is such a brilliant phrase because it's about that ability to accept that you don't know all the answers and that somebody else in the organization, wherever they sit, might have a better perspective on this that you do. And you can imagine how difficult that is with law firms because what lawyers don't want to do is admit they don't know the answers to things. So being able to create that sense where someone actually says, no, maybe this is something that I don't know the answer to and I want to work collaboratively with somebody else, or I need to seek advice, or I need to work alongside somebody, internally or externally, is a really powerful way to try to create that movement and that change. But it's very difficult. I do think, and I'll probably get really told off for saying this, but I do think that women are better at coping with not knowing the answer to things. I do think there's a gendered role in here where we're prepared to admit that we don't actually know something, or we're prepared to go out and seek the solution working with another person or seek the advice of another person. I think it's very hard sometimes for men in certain roles to do that. And I'm not saying it's because they can't. I think it's partly the gendered nature of the workplace and the fact that men have been pushed into those spaces, which is kind of why you're having this podcast, isn't it, Naomi? Because there aren't enough women. We're out there. We're just not necessarily getting the bandwidth. Or perhaps we've just decided it's just not worth the hassle and that we'll just carry on doing our bit where we can and actually save our energies for doing something else. Because if you're constantly fighting to be heard, it's really tiring, and on top of all the other things we have to do, maybe it's just, sometimes women just think, oh, well, I'll just get on with it.
But it's all right what you said. Sorry, Naomi, we just excluded you from the discussion here. It's all right what you said. I actually have seen young men coming to see me after some of my speaking and saying, it's actually harder for us because we are not expected to be vulnerable. So it's even harder for us to be, and this is actually quite sad. So we need to push that. And I hope that there will be more vulnerable leaders coming up in the young generation.
But you're so right. It's so under threat because if you get a macho leadership style, all of that emotional intelligence that young people have, particularly young men who've been grown up in a much more open environment. I mean, young people coming into the workforce now understand about emotional intelligence. They understand about gendered roles. They understand about overcoming those things. If we push all of that out because we have really heavy macho leadership, emanating from in the US, that is really threatening to all of us.
That's new kind of leadership is obviously being modelled from one side of the Atlantic, and I'm with you that we have to model a different type. Amanda, I'm wondering whether the 1 million hour pledge that you are involved with and leading, whether there is something around there which is providing a space. And Magali, I'd like to chat to you about the S4 space that you're providing as well, because I think we've got to find ways to overcome that friction.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And 1 million hours is a pledge to raise, as it says, 1 million hours of intellectual capital from across the legal industry and legal services sector, and hopefully across from clients as well, so wider professional services. And it's a space for anybody to volunteer their skills. And so it's not just pro bono. You don't have to just be a lawyer, trained lawyer, fee earner. We're asking for skilled volunteering. So that gives everybody an opportunity to contribute. So whether you're working in, marketing or audit or finance or communications or wherever you will sit in business development in the organization, you can contribute and give probably the most valuable thing that you've got to give, which is your capacity, your intellectual capacity, your mind, your brain. It's really important that people continue to volunteer on the ground, plant trees, clear ditches, do all of that important environmental work. But lots of our organisations who are in the front line of climate need the intellectual capacity as well. They need to be able to unlock resources that they can't afford to pay for if they're a not-for-profit NGO academic department. And I think it's the reason it's landed so well and people are so excited about it is it's something you can do really easily. And very often employers will tick that off because all law firms have got a pro bono commitment. They struggle sometimes to find the right projects. They struggle to find environmental sustainable projects, and that's the ones that people tend to want to do. So we're acting as a matching service. So this is a call out. If you're an NGO or an academic department or a startup, and you need some help, then 1 million hours could be a route for you. But I think it has chimed with people's desire to do something and also their sense that they feel a bit powerless. And I don't know if you've encountered this, Magali, with some of those young people you were talking about, those young men. You feel really, really anxious, but unable to know where to go to do something. So disempowered by the enormity of the climate crisis and the kind of anxiety. So it leads to climate anxiety, which then in turn leads to apathy and more anxiety. And we need to try and break that cycle and give people a route to do things, positive things, where they can affect change.
Given we're recording this the week of Valentine's, this should be the Valentine's pledge. The matchmaking, use your time in a more beneficial way.
Yeah. And we don't want to be pious about it or preachy. And it can be really simple things, but it can also be really exciting things and give people a chance to develop a skill set that they didn't know they had, or to apply that skill set in a way that perhaps they're not always able to apply it in the work context as well. And that's really important.
And Magali, that point that Amanda's making around the intellectual capital within your own sphere of influence, from what I understand, that is what S4 is all about.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. I was listening and I thought that's absolutely what S4 is about. So maybe I need to get Amanda part of S4.
And we should explain what S4 stands for.
Yeah, I will in a second. But it also applies to those lonely people you were talking about, Amanda, earlier. So S4 actually stands for Secret Society of Sustainability Spies. And it came up with the realization that a lot of people want to do things where they are, but either they feel powerless or they don't know what to do, or they don't have a hierarchy that is supporting what they would like to do. And then I'm telling them, well, don't try to change your hierarchy because that's going to take too much time. Or you can try, but in the meantime, you can change your own job. And the reason I thought of that is because if you look at the sustainability function today, in many, many companies, it's been now reduced to a reporting compliance function and a communication function, but it's not anymore a business changing function, which is for me what is absolutely key. We need just to, if we want to decouple production and emission, there's no other way than changing the business model. So the people who are in charge of the business need to do sustainability. And actually, quite a lot of them want to. And what's interesting is many people have reached out to me saying, Magali, how do I move from typical business career like you had, to sustainability like you did? So what can I do? And I say, don't even try. I think the time has passed. I mean, you might succeed, but your chances are pretty low. I was just very, very lucky to be the right time, right moment, Swiss cheese, alignment of hold, whatever. But instead, if you are in a powerful position in your own company right now, there's so much you can do because you're in charge. In sustainability, you will be influencing, you will not be doing. When you are, I don't know, a chief operating officer of a company or a financial person, whatever, or a legal person, there's a huge amount you can do. And you don't need to actually tell people, just do it. Because the latitude of action that you have is actually relatively high. So that's why it's actually called spies. It's not that we don't want to talk about it, but it's just stop asking questions, stop trying to convince people, just do it.
Yeah, we have a similar refrain that's, not all lawyers are climate lawyers, but every lawyer needs to understand climate. And you're absolutely right. So not every chief operating officer is a sustainability person, but they need to know about sustainability and push it through their business. So it's a wonderful initiative to get everybody to own this really difficult problem.
And Amanda, to that point, and actually I'll just quote Richard Branson here. His phrase is, screw it, just do it. So there's another way of saying it. In terms of doing it, what better profession than the law to get things done, and that sort of regulation carrot stick approach. How are you encouraging those within your sphere to use the law to speed up climate action, and even I think hold governments to account? I'm thinking about the work of Client Earth, especially given the geopolitical context that we referred to earlier.
Well, that's a really difficult question to answer at the moment. I think that from where I sit within the business that I run, I have two routes. One is to carry on supporting those firms who've made the commitments and encouraging them to carry on with their commitments, even though have pushback, particularly from the US, and the unpicking of some of the climate commitments. And we do that by picking up in kind of Magali's point of framing this as a business risk and also an opportunity. So, while governments think in 4-year terms, business thinks in 10 or 20-year terms, and lots of businesses remain committed to this direction of travel, even though things are going to be tough, I think. So that's one way of doing it. And then the other way of doing it is to look at the other part of the legal sector, which is the criminal bar and the commercial bar. So where we've actually got barristers who can affect legal challenges and change. So I'm thinking of the great work that's done by some of those really standout organisations like Cornerstone, where they've pushed back and, winning the Finch case, which was about fracking and emissions, winning the Rosebank case that came through recently to actually push back on the oil licence for the North Sea oil platform. You've got real change makers sitting in the legal profession who are able to hold the government to account through the courts and the legal process that we have. So we need to support those organisations as well, really, and encourage them and give them heart and support where we can, because they're not just looking at their emissions, they're looking at what they can do to make change. Corporate private practice is probably never going to go down the campaigning route of Client Earth, and would never set to do that, because that's not the role that it plays. But the more we can encourage those big firms to keep on listening and keep on working with their clients to make change, the better. But I do think it's going to be tricky. I mean, I honestly think we're going to have a really tough time talking about this. And the fact that we've already got firms erasing ESG from their narratives and rowing back on their diversity and inclusion targets it's symptomatic that there's a group of people out there who don't care about this stuff, not just the planet, but equal opportunities. And those of us who do, and when we've got our champions that do and our vulnerable leaders that do, we've got to do everything we can to support them and help them to stay firm, because it's going to be really tough, I think. Really, really
And
tough.
I think that to that point about holding those that are really trying to make change, maybe in an elegant segue, but I do think it's important for us to look at those smaller firms, those startups that are really trying to make a difference. And I know that you're an angel investor in a number of early stage companies. Could you tell us a little bit about what they're trying to achieve and how you're lending your expertise to them?
It's actually quite fun to, when you can afford it, obviously, but to work with startup and to be angel investors, because it makes me feel about 30 years younger. So I do it for my own feel good, feel young things. So that's a real reason why I do it. But the other reason is because I'm really trying to use whichever way I have to have as much impact as possible. So those companies that I am trying to support are companies which are a lot in the reporting side. And the reason is even though I did talk earlier about changing the climate change, one way to change the climate change is to make reporting so easy. Sorry, business change, I meant, that they can support business change. They don't have to spend so much time in reporting. So a lot of them were on either making it easier to do environmental product declaration, EPDs, making it easier to report your scope 3, making it easier, etc. So that's the ones I've invested in. And I've invested in a fun one, which I thought they were pretty cool. They are trying to make an Airbnb, but on a sustainable side. So explaining, finding out places where people can go by train, including the last mile, etc. I thought it's not really my cup, but I usually would try to invest in organization that I can help via my network or whichever skills I've acquired over the years. It's just a way for me to try to have a bit more impact than I have today. Use every single thing I have in my hands to have impact.
Your full toolkit. And Amanda, final question to you. In terms of advice that you might give to others in the legal profession who are looking to collaborate, looking a little bit like Magali is, to have a bit more impact, what can they do? What would be your advice?
Well, they can talk to each other. They can join one of those many networks that I talked about, not trying to plug mine, but there are lots of them. There's the Legal Sustainability Alliance and Legal Charter 1.5, and there's the Bar Sustainability Network. So they can join a network, because I think that you do get very lonely as a sustainability officer in a law firm or in any firm. You can get very lonely and feel very isolated, and you can be, as you said, Magali, you can be marginalised. So join a network. That's really important. I think also hang on to why you're doing this, because sometimes the compliance and the reporting can get in the way of the action. And it's really important that you carry on, carrying the banner for change, because that's absolutely vital. And there's lots of things you can do outside of work, like volunteering. We're constantly encouraging people to think about connecting with their local environment and, sometimes making small changes in your own local community can be really, really effective. And if you're young, getting involved with being a trustee of an environmental charity or something is fantastic. Growth, personal development, but also really important to that charity. But I would say join a network and get engaged and volunteer your time through 1 million hours, because all of that's really important. And I just wanted really quickly to pick up on Magali's point about startups. That's one of the places that I go to for find encouragement and give me hope, is that the plethora of really powerful climate startups that we have in the UK, particularly coming out of all of our institutions and our universities, is really, really encouraging, because we know that is part of the solution. Reducing carbon emissions is one part, but also coming up with clean alternatives to help our lives improve in the future. They're really vital. So congratulations, Magali, for supporting that sector. They're much in need of it.
Magali, finally, that point about not being lonely. I'd love you to just mention now, I know you've got a workshop for the Secret Society for Sustainability Spies coming up. Perhaps those listening might like to join. Can you tell us a bit more before I let you both go?
Yeah, so the really is a deliverable we want to come up with is, what does it mean to be an S4? And giving some very practical tips of what you can do. Let's take an example. If you're a procurement person, you could add tomorrow morning some element of sustainability in your evaluation criteria and make them strong enough that you would not pick a supplier who doesn't have sustainability criteria. So we thought, let's try with one function. We wanted that for each function, and the workshop will be on procurement supply chain function, led with a great lady who's called Renia, who has been, her as well, a pioneer on everything about sustainable procurement. And it's really coming up with some very, very pragmatic, useful tips. And maybe one day it will end up being a book of recipes, of sustainability recipes. That's could be what could come out. And the workshop will be, I've got the exact date, end of February sometimes.
26th of Feb, I have written here, at 1 p.m. GMT, 2 p.m. CET.
Here you are. Thanks,
Lovely. Well, listen, thank you very much. And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Women in Climate podcast. A huge thank you to my guests, Magali Anderson and Amanda Carpenter, for sharing their stories and their insights on taking action in the fight against climate change. We hope you're leaving this conversation feeling motivated and empowered to make your own impact, no matter where you are in your journey. The challenges are real, but so are the solutions, as we've heard today. And female leadership is essential to driving meaningful change. If you've been inspired by today's conversation, don't forget to share this podcast with your network and continue to support and amplify the voices of women who are making a positive impact on the planet. And as always, stay tuned for more episodes of Women in Climate, where we'll continue to celebrate and elevate the extraordinary women leading the charge for a sustainable future. Thank you for listening. Until next time, let's keep pushing for change, because the planet can't wait. GIB Asset Management is a boutique asset management firm that provides a diverse investment offering across the risk-return spectrum, in equities and fixed income, alongside their treasury business, which aims to provide effective and bespoke solutions. GIB Asset Management is based in London with an AUM of $6 billion as of December 2024.